It's difficult to imagine what more we can do in the next few years, but a time will be that we will have to integrate what essentially have been at different levels two Indias. There is an India of the cities, the urban India that you and I belong to in our normal day life, and there is an India beyond the cities, rural India. And they both intentionally and subconsciously, institutionally, in an organized manner and a disorganized manner, are gradually moving towards each other. Much as we want, under Pura, we want all facilities of urban areas to be reached to rural areas, much as we are trying to create some change and some movement in terms of trade towards agriculture from industry, much as we want to give agriculture and value-added agriculture a larger share of the national product of GDP. Much as we do realize that the 80% people who live in rural areas are directly or indirectly associated with agriculture are gradually going to move into urban and suburban areas or near urban areas. I think there are huge, big challenges, and somewhere when this integration between Bharat and India, between urban India and rural India takes place, and it will and it must, one big challenge will be, for those of you who worked on theory of taxation, one big challenge will be how do we integrate people who've been completely outside the tax net and bring them in, both into direct as well as indirect taxation. And that will be the major challenge. And I think all that you're doing today is that you're preparing yourself and equipping yourself for that day to come when this integration will take place. That, of course, will be the moment when India will be able to say that we have ceased to be a developing country and we have become a developed or at least a near developed country. And I think it's not something that we shouldn't dream of. It is not something that we cannot anticipate, and not something that we cannot aspire to. Because if we don't, we will be defeatist in our attitude. Take small examples, and of course, exceptional circumstances help them. But we do know, I've been to Dubai, UAE recently, and the people who've lived there 30 years, Indians who've lived there 30 years, talk about the airport in Dubai and Abu Dhabi being smaller than the Safdar Airport building. And in their own lifetime, they've seen a huge economic explosion take place. But of course, they had oil. We've seen old pictures of Kuala Lumpur and of Singapore. We've seen little shacks in Singapore. And Singapore doesn't have oil. Singapore doesn't even have water. And yet, Singapore, because it could become a trading hub, has become what it is today. There's a vast difference that we have in our income and per capita income, of a trading hub like Singapore. India has many advantages. And for you, specifically, for those interested in the tax regime, I think India's potential advantage is the potential taxpayer of this country. I mean, you imagine, people often just think of what will happen when everybody has a car and everybody has a scooter and everybody is consuming electricity, which we think is reasonable, power that we think is reasonable for an average citizen to get. Just think that if that happens, they will also be taxpayers, they will also be contributing to the kitty and to the consolidated fund of this country. And I think that is the massive potential that we have today. And how does enterprise happen? I think today we are here looking at both something that is an educational tool and something that is an enterprise. And the story of how the founder editor, Mr. Shailendra Kumar, sitting there playing on one little computer, wondering whether there was something at the end of that tunnel. And today you see the light at the end of the tunnel. What you see is an impressive array of our best minds in the field of revenue taxation, and this itself tells a tale, and it's only 10 years. 10 years is a very, very short time, and I do think that you made a wonderful beginning. At an appropriate, very appropriate and apt time, you moved into international taxation. As the Secretary said, a very important area of transfer pricing that is emerging. And I think as we go global, as Indian companies expand their footprint across the world, I think this will be a very, 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 very critical area. And of course, what Mr. Murthy said, the new tax language. I think this is important. There will be a time when we will be able to make greater sense to each other in the world, because we would have converged with IFRS, our accounting systems would have converged, many of our legislations would have been brought in line with legislations elsewhere, and that talks about tax as well. When I was sitting here thinking of my only engagement with somebody deeply involved and interested in taxation was when I was studying at Oxford. I didn't do taxation, but my tutor, Robert Venables, who's now become obviously a very, very important tax counsel in the US, in Temple's Inn, he was a tax lawyer. And he was a tax lawyer not simply because that was one subject that he had to do or he wanted to do, but he was a tax lawyer because he passionately believed in the idea of tax.